Good afternoon, friends. It's always wonderful to be back in Bhubaneswar with the Tata Steel Bhubaneswar Literary Meet held in an association with Shongbad. We have an array of wonderful authors as always, and as always, we also have some wonderful thought leaders, people from other strands of the arts world, and some wonderful performances dotting the next 2.5 days. Without much ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Chanakya Chaudhary, Vice President Corporate Services, to welcome the guests. Over to you, Chanakya.
Good afternoon, friends. Thank you, Malvika, Mr. Amitav Ghosh, Mr. Patnaik, and all of you from Bhubaneswar. And I heard some people saying they've traveled from a few distances away to be here today. And it's always a pleasure to come back to this city of, I think, very, very rich literature, art, culture. In some way, it's now also becoming a sports capital. And we just saw a very fantastic World Cup hockey for men concluding. And I think the state of Orissa continues to amaze all of us, and that rightly says the best kept secret. Nevertheless, happy to be back. We've had some issues in the last few years because of the pandemic, and I'm hopeful that life is coming back to normal, where we can meet each other, see each other, and in person, and hear and talk. So I think we are now in the 7th edition of this Tata Steel Literary Meet at Bhubaneswar. It's always been very motivating and enthusiastic for us to come back because of the participation, not only of the authors, but also of all of you who come and witness what is happening, what people's views are, and also participate. I think as a company, we exist for the last more than a century now, 115 years. But I think one of the things which goes as a hallmark for our company is that we want to be a part of the community. We want to promote what is, the best way of connecting with each one of us in the community, which is art, culture, literature, sports. And I think Orissa gives us that whole platform to kind of showcase the best authors from within Orissa as well as from outside. And it's a good mix by virtue of which every year we can hear and see some of the very healthy discussions and debates which will carry on. And I'm sure the next couple of days are going to be no less. It's going to be better. I've seen the lineup. It's fantastic. I also met Miss Sarabhai short while ago, and it was very nice to catch up again. And I know she was also in the Jharkhand Literary Meet. And I think it's always good to bring the full comprehensive art and culture, including dances, together, and music. And I think without much ado, I think all of you would be waiting to listen to our chief guest for the day. And I think I was talking to him that we were together in this event a few years back, and after that also we've engaged a lot in the literary platforms with him. And I think his work always amazes all of us. His work is very, very current, and it also connects with all of us from every walk of life, because it's all about our own existence. And Sambad, what do I say about Mr. Patnaik and the work they do here? And I think it's amazing that all of us can be on the same platform. It also is very good that we all think alike for promotion of art, literature, and music and sports. So thank you very much for joining in today, and hope all of us have a great 2 days ahead. Thank you.
I would now like to invite Sri Ranjan Patnaik, the chairman of the Sambad Group, and in many ways a mentor and advisor for this festival. The Shri Ganesh of this festival invariably happens in the chambers of Shomo Babu as well as Gaurahari Babu, where we discuss the agenda and the events that can be part of the forthcoming literature festival. He's a very busy man, as are his team members, and I always feel very grateful that whatever they are doing, they put it aside and love planning this festival with our team and add their local perspective to whatever we do. Welcome, Shomo Babu, and over to you to address the audience.
Jai Jagannath. Malavika has literally commanded me to speak in Odia. I was so pleased to know that. Sambad Paribar Tarafuru ମୁଁ ଆଜିର ଏ ସାହିତ୍ୟ ଉତ୍ସବକୁ ଆପଣମାନଙ୍କୁ ସମସ୍ତଙ୍କୁ ସ୍ୱାଗତ କରୁଛି। କରୋନାର ଅନୁଭବକୁ ପଛରେ ରଖି ପୁଣି ଆମ ପୁରୁଣା ହଜିଲା ଦିନଗୁଡ଼ିକୁ ଫେରି ପାଇବା ପାଇଁ ଆଜିର ଏ କାର୍ଯ୍ୟକ୍ରମ ଗୋଟିଏ ବିରାଟ ବଡ଼ ପଦକ୍ଷେପ ବୋଲି ମୁଁ ଅନୁଭବ କରୁଛି ଏବଂ ସବୁଠାରୁ ବେଶୀ ଆନନ୍ଦ ଆମକୁ ଦେଉଛି ଆଜିର ଯେ ଉଦ୍ଘାଟକ ଆମ ସମସ୍ତଙ୍କ ପାଇଁ ଅତି ପରିଚିତ ଗର୍ବ ଏବଂ ଗୌରବର କାରଣ। ଅତୀତରେ ସମ୍ବାଦ ପରିବାର ତାଙ୍କୁ ଅତିଥି ହିସାବରେ ପାଇ ଗୌରବାନ୍ୱିତ ହୋଇଛି। ଆଜି ଟାଟା ପରିବାରକୁ ମୁଁ ବ୍ୟକ୍ତିଗତ ଭାବେ ଧନ୍ୟବାଦ ଜଣାଇବି ଯେ ପୁଣି ଥରେ ଅମିତାଭ ବାବୁଙ୍କୁ ଓଡ଼ିଶାକୁ ଆସିବା ପାଇଁ ଏବଂ ଆପଣମାନଙ୍କ ସହିତ କିଛି ସମୟ କଟାଇବା ପାଇଁ ଗୋଟିଏ ବାହାନା ସେ ତିଆରି କରିଛନ୍ତି। ଆଜିର ଏ ଉତ୍ସବ ବାହାନା ବହୁ ପୁରୁଣା କାଳରୁ ଆମେ ବିଜ୍ଞାପନ ଦେଖି ଆସୁଥିଲୁ। ଚାଣକ୍ୟ ଚୌଧୁରୀଜୀ ସେ ସମ୍ପର୍କରେ ଉଲ୍ଲେଖ କରୁଥିଲେ। ଟାଟା କମ୍ପାନୀର ବିଜ୍ଞାପନ ଥିଲା ୱି ଅଲସୋ ମେକ୍ ଷ୍ଟିଲ୍। ଏବେ କିନ୍ତୁ ମୁଁ ଲକ୍ଷ୍ୟ କଲି ତା ଟିକେ ବଦଳି ଯାଇଛି। ହକି ମ୍ୟାଚ୍ ସମୟରେ ଯେଉଁ ବିଜ୍ଞାପନ ସେମାନେ ସାରା ବିଶ୍ୱକୁ ଦେଖାଉଥିଲେ ୱି ଅଲସୋ ମେକ୍ ଟୁମୋରୋ। ଆସନ୍ତାକାଲି ପାଇଁ ଆମେ ଯେଉଁମାନେ ଚିନ୍ତା କରୁଛୁ ଟାଟା କମ୍ପାନୀ ସେମାନଙ୍କ ଭିତରୁ ଅନ୍ୟତମ। ଭବିଷ୍ୟତ କଥା ଚିନ୍ତା କରିବାର ଯେଉଁ ସମୟ ଆମ ସମସ୍ତଙ୍କ ପାଇଁ ଆସିଛି ଟାଟା ଶିଳ୍ପ ସମୂହ ସେଥିରେ ଆଗୁଆ ଅଛନ୍ତି। ଏହା ପାଇଁ ମୁଁ ଟାଟା ଗ୍ରୁପର ପ୍ରତିନିଧି ଭାଇଙ୍କୁ ଅନ୍ୟମାନଙ୍କୁ ବହୁତ ବହୁତ ଧନ୍ୟବାଦ ଦେବାକୁ ଚାହୁଁଛି। ଆପଣମାନେ ସମସ୍ତେ ଆମକୁ ଶୁଣିବାକୁ ଏଠିକି ଆସିନାହାନ୍ତି, ଆସିଛନ୍ତି ଅମିତାଭ ବାବୁଙ୍କୁ ଏବଂ ତାପରେ ପରେ ଯେଉଁ ବନ୍ଧୁମାନେ ଏ ମଞ୍ଚକୁ ଆସିବେ ଆଲୋଚନା କରିବେ। କେବଳ ଏତିକି ମୁଁ ନିବେଦନ କରି ଆପଣମାନଙ୍କୁ ପୁଣି ଥରେ ସ୍ୱାଗତ କରିବି ଏବଂ ଚାଣକ୍ୟ ଚୌଧୁରୀ ଏବଂ ମାଲବିକା ଦେବୀଙ୍କୁ ବହୁତ ବହୁତ ଧନ୍ୟବାଦ ଏବଂ କୃତଜ୍ଞତା ଜଣାଇବି। ମହାତ୍ମା ଗାନ୍ଧୀ କହୁଥିଲେ I am not afraid of going to jail. I am afraid of the company I will find in the jail. I just want to reverse it. टाटा कंपनी सहित मिसी किछि करिबा पई जदि सुयोग मिले ताठारु भल बा गौरवमय कार्य किछि हेइ न पारे. It is always a pleasure and it is always a great privilege to partner with Tata. तेणु सेमाने जे आमको तांको सहित मिसई ओडिशा रे साहित्य उत्सव पालन करिबा पई निष्पत्ति नैचंती सेति पई तांको मध्ये कृतज्ञता जणाउची. टाटा और ओडिशा एमाने अंगांगी भावे जड़ित. टाटा ओडिशार संपर्क बहु दिन अच्छी. एबे जामशेदपुर रे सेना कारखाना थिला किंतु तार जो कंचा माल मयूरभंज रु जाउथला एबे सेमाने पुणी थरे गोपालपुर प्रोजेक्ट असफल हेबा परे पुणी कलिंग नगर रे सेमाने विराट बड़ प्रोजेक्ट करिसेंती टाटा कंपनी एथिपाई आम समस्तंकर धन्यवादर पात्र किंतु यही उत्सव मानकरे बेले बेले किछि प्रतिवादर स्वर मध्य उठे ए अनुष्ठान रे मध्य किछि समय रे उठिथिला एवं तार उपयुक्त मुकाबिला टाटा कंपनी करिछि। मु केवल गोटे गणमाध्यमर प्रतिनिधि हिसाब रे एतिकी कहबाकू चाहिछि जे वर्तमान समस्तंकर ए माटी प्रति ऋण परिशोधर बेल ए माटीरू आमे कौन नहींचे एवं ए माटी को केते देइचे यार गोटे हिसाब हेबा दरकार। ए हिसाब रे आम समस्तंकर जितापट हेबा दरकार। मु माटीरू जेतिकी नहींची ताठारू अधिक देवी पछे कम देवी नाही। मु भावुची एही भली साहित्य उत्सवर आयोजन ए देवा प्रक्रियार अयमारंभ मात्र। ए प्रक्रिया के चलिले आम समस्त भितर सौहार्द्य संप्रीति एवं भूल बुझामणार कौनसी अवकाश रहिब नाही। शेष रे साहित्यिक बंधु मानकु आज ए भुवनेश्वर क्लबर परिसर को टाटा फेस्टिवल तरफरु स्वागत कला बेले एतिकी कही मोर वक्तव्य शेष करने को चाहिए जे आमर गणतांत्रिक अनुष्ठान गुड़िक वर्तमान अवक्षयमुखी होती। मु से विषय रे व्याख्या करने को जाऊ नहीं। आपण माने समस्ते सचेतन। आमे जो भली गोटे देश चाहूले जो भली गोटे भारत विचार कथा कहूले जो भली गोटे संविधान आमको देइथिले जो भली गोटे परिवेश रे आमे रहिबाकू चाहूँ सबुथिरे कोच ना कोठी किछि खुण लागिबाकू आरंभ कलानी। यार प्रतिकारर दायित्व कौन साहित्यर नाही। साहित्यर दायित्व संपर्क रे आजिर ए परिप्रेक्षी रे आमे समस्ते टिके सचेतन हेले मु भावुची एभली उत्सव अत्यंत सफल हेब फलप्रदपद हेब एवं आम समस्त प्रासंगिक हेब। समस्त को पुणी थरे स्वागत करी पुणी थरे जगन्नाथंकर आशीर्वाद ए उत्सवर सफलता कामना करी रहूची। वंदे उत्कल जननी।
And now it's a very special privilege to introduce Amitav Ghosh, Gyanpith awardee, much felicitated, much read and much loved. I recently did an event with him where I said good authors make us learn something new, but great authors make us think. And Amitav Ghosh, over the last 3 decades, which is a large part of my lifetime, and many people in the audience also seem to be of that vintage, and some even younger who have read him from the time they started reading, when they could start reading his books. Amitav has made us rethink what we learn. He has taught us about new worlds. He's taught us about new aspects of looking at the world we live in, of looking at the plants, the climate, the changes that we take for granted and think we can do nothing about. He is an author who not only makes us think, he makes us rethink and re-examine the world we live in. Thank you, Amitav, for accepting this invitation from Tata Steel Bhubaneswar Literary Meet. It is always a privilege and honor to have you with us. Before I ask you to speak, I would like you to ceremonially inaugurate the festival by signing on the board behind you.
Well, thank you very much, Malavika, for that very generous introduction. It's a great pleasure and a privilege for me to be here again. And thank you for inviting me. Thank you for hosting this wonderful event. It's a pleasure and privilege for me also to be here with Mr. Chanakya Chaudhary, who over the last few years I've gotten to know somewhat. He's an unusually thoughtful figure as a corporate leader of a mining company. A few months ago, he invited me to come to Jamshedpur to speak to the top management of Tata Steel. And I went there thinking I was going to hear a lot of greenwashing, which is quite normal nowadays. But in fact, I was pleasantly surprised to discover that there's a really serious engagement with climate change amongst the top management of Tata Steel. I mean, they're really engaged with it. Whether it'll ever be possible to produce steel in a climate-friendly way, I don't know. I'm rather skeptical. But it's interesting that at least there's some engagement with that subject. And it's a special pleasure to be here with Soumya Babu, because we were students together at Oxford, many years ago in the late 70s and early 80s. We were both PhD students, and I remember, I'm going to call him Soumya rather than Soumya Babu. I remember Soumya, like all of us, we would just wheel around our bicycles, and Soumya was very quiet. He was a very quiet person then, as he still is. And I would never have imagined that he would become this great media magnate, which in fact he has become, founding this amazing company, which has really revolutionized the media scene in Orissa. And I've seen him every time I come. And he always takes me to the best sari shops for my mother and sister. So it's lovely to be here again with Soumya. Actually, I have a very long relationship with Odisha, because when I was in college in Delhi, I had a very good friend called Jitendra Mishra. And the first time I came to Orissa was actually in 1976. And I went to stay with Jitu, we used to call him. He later became an ambassador in the IFS and so on. But I went to stay in his family home. It was in a village called Bir Purushottampur. That's somewhere between Puri and Bhubaneswar. It was a beautiful, beautiful little village. And his parents were, literally sort of running the farm. And it was an amazing experience to have this exposure to a rural life in Odisha. And I remember feeling very envious of Jitu, because he had, on the one hand, a very cosmopolitan exposure on one side. His brother-in-law, I think, was the famous poet Ramakant Rath, and many other members of his family were distinguished literary people and distinguished officers in the IAS and so on. But at the same time, he also had this exposure to a rural life in a way that nobody else I knew had. And I think it was because of my friendship with Jitu that I first read Gopinath Mohanty's. And Gopinath Mohanty's Poraja had an enormous influence on me, and I continue to think that he is really one of the towering figures of Indian literature in the late 20th century. And what I particularly appreciated about his work was the deep sympathy and affection for Adivasi life. There was a sense of the pain and tragedy of the destruction of Adivasi life, but also a deep, deep appreciation of everything that made it important and valuable. And I think now, as we find ourselves heading towards a very uncertain and disrupted future, because we can all see that the future that lies ahead of us is disrupted in so many ways because of climate, because of biodiversity loss, not to speak of all the political disruptions that we're seeing everywhere around the world. I think it's very important to remember that the usual discourse that we get about Adivasi life, that there's poverty, that they need to be, enter the mainstream and so on and so forth. A lot of this is founded on completely mistaken and wrong assumptions. I mean, what Adivasis offer us is, in fact, a different mode of engaging with the world around us, with the forests, with nature. I mean, somebody who lives in a forest is multiply rich. I mean, our ordinary per capita measures of income simply don't take into account, the value of clean air, of having trees around you, of having community around you, of having family around you. I think we have grown accustomed to some completely distorted kinds of values. And it really takes a writer like Gopinath Mohanty to remind us, of the great importance of those values. I can't speak about Oriya literature really beyond that, but I do see that, that sense of the importance of Adivasi life was also very present in Bengali literature because of writers like Mahashweta Devi, who really spent her whole life working with Adivasi communities. But in many ways, if you look back on Indian literature of let's say, the second half of the 20th century, this was a constant theme in many parts of the country. This is what made Indian literature very distinctive. The sorts of engagements that writers had with the countryside, with the forests, with Adivasi life. And I think that has actually more or less disappeared. Certainly it's disappeared in Indian writing in English. I don't know if it's the case with Oriya or even with Bangla. But I think it's very important for us to try and remember everything that made writers like Gopinath Mohanty and Advaita Bormon in Bangla and Mahashweta Devi. We should not look at them as representing a past. We should rather look at them as representing a kind of avant-garde, a sort of way of teaching us how we can retrieve something from the disrupted and diminished world that we are coming into and that our children will even more come into. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chanakya. Thank you, Amitav. Thank you, Shomo Babu. So that concludes our inaugural ceremony. We will now rearrange the stage and segue straight into the first session.